Cooks Illustrated came up with their own unique version of the no-knead method, which I really like and bake fairly often. It's significantly different enough from the New York Times method to make a nice and easy addition to your bread baking repertoire. It's definitely one of my wife's favorite breads, and one Breadtopia reader even told me of a friend of his who's not even very fond of bread, but really loves this one. They call it their almost no-knead method because it does involve a little bit of kneading, but overall I find it's actually easier than the New York Times method, and I think you'll see what I mean as we go through this. In this video, I'm going to bake two loaves. One will be their standard white flour recipe, and the other their whole wheat. Alright, let's get going. Okay, first we're going to do the basic white flour recipe, and it couldn't be much simpler. And this is how I go about it. Take the bowl and put it on a scale, zero it out, and add 15 ounces of white flour. This is bread flour, but you can use all-purpose flour as well. And I just add it until it reaches 15 ounces. Now this is the equivalent of about 3 cups. And then 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. And then just mix that up. And zero out the scale again. And now 7 ounces of water. And now their secret ingredients calls for 3 ounces of beer. This happens to be Stone Mill. I've used a couple different kinds of beers. It imparts slightly different flavors depending on what you use. I suggest you just experiment and see what you like. So I'm going to bring it up to 10 ounces with the beer, and that'll make 10 ounces total liquid. And then a tablespoon of white vinegar. Now, why beer and vinegar, you might ask? It's to simulate the complex flavors that you might normally get using sourdough starter as your leavening agent without having to actually mess with sourdough starter. And then we'll just mix it up. Now, if you're familiar with the more traditional no-knead method, now traditional, it's been out for for over a year, the New York Times no-knead method, then you'll notice that this is a much stiffer mix. So it takes a little bit more elbow grease to get it all incorporated, all the liquid and flour incorporated and mixed up evenly. But it's still very simple and easy. And set that aside for now. And then I'll do the whole wheat version. Their whole wheat version calls for 10 ounces of white, and 5 ounces of whole wheat, and then 1.5 teaspoons of salt, and 1/4 teaspoon of instant yeast. And the only difference with this recipe, besides the addition of the whole wheat, is that it also calls for 2 tablespoons of sugar. And mix up the ingredients, the dry ingredients. And as before, we'll go with 7 ounces of water and the 3 ounces of beer. Just a little bit more. And a tablespoon of vinegar. and mix it up like before. And when you've finished mixing them both up, then just place them inside a plastic bag, or just cover them with plastic, and set them aside at room temperature for 8 to 18 hours. Now again, that's significantly different than the recommended time from the New York Times method. This gives you a little bit more latitude. Any time between 8 and 18 hours is sufficient. So we'll come back tomorrow and take it from there. Okay, it's the next morning. It's been about 16 hours. Hope you all had a nice evening. So let's see what the dough looks like. Okay, this is kind of interesting to see a side-by-side comparison with the whole wheat mixture versus the all white flour mixture. The white flour mixture looks like it's about a good 25-30% more volume, more risen than the whole wheat. Such is the way with whole wheat versus white flour recipes. So what I'm going to do is dust the kneading surface here and do the white flour one first. Dust the top a little bit and my fingers a little bit. And since this dough is way soft, it's a cinch to knead, and the texture feels great. What they recommend is kneading just 10 to 15 times, not 10 to 15 minutes like you might with some bread recipes. And what I find is that this dough is so nice that I have to actually restrain myself from over kneading. I don't want to squeeze every last air bubble out of it. So we do want to keep some of the air bubbles in there that were there from the overnight rise. So that's probably good enough. And then in the instructions that you get from cooksillustrated.com, they have you kind of pulling the edges up to create a ball with a tighter skin. I'm just pulling the edges of the dough up, the sides of the dough, and kind of pursing them at the top. And that creates a tight skin underneath. And then you can just kind of pinch the top together, and because the dough is nice and moist, it seals very easily. Now I'm just going to set that aside for a second and do the whole wheat one.